Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. So, as ever, let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? Starting with The Mirror, which focuses on evidence given to the COVID inquiry that Rishi Sunak was allegedly ready to let more people die rather than impose any more curbs on their freedoms ahead of the second wave. The Eye also reporting on the evidence given by the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, with the headline, Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out drove the second wave of COVID. The Metro, meanwhile, looks ahead to Wednesday's autumn statement in which Rishi Sunak is expected to offer tax cuts, which the paper says he hopes will help win the next election. The Telegraph says Mr Sunak is pinning his electoral hopes on what it calls a Thatcher tax package. This is the front of the Express. PM, we can and will cut taxes, while the Daily Mail celebrates what it calls the return of tax-cutting Tories. Well, the Times says the autumn statement will also include measures to get more people off sickness benefits by working from home. Harry's paper, The Sun, carries an exclusive interview with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky with the headline, Putin tried to kill me 5 times. Pippa's paper, The Guardian, leads with a new warning from the United Nations that the world is heading for what it calls a hellish 3-degree rise in global temperatures. Well, the Financial Times reports on a possible return for the chief executive of the tech firm OpenAI, who is unseated in what's been described as a botched boardroom coup. And the Daily Star returns to its recent obsession with the word boffins. Don't know the context. We'll get to it. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can take a full look at those front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's go to Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. We'll certainly get your thoughts on what's coming up in the autumn statement in just a moment. First of all, let's reflect, shall we, on what we heard at the COVID inquiry today, including in the Eye, Pippa, the suggestion that the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, driven by Rishi Sunak, drove the second wave of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, today was yet another really quite dramatic day at the COVID inquiry. I mean, we've had quite a lot of those in the last couple of weeks with various political figures and senior officials coming out and telling us what was really going on behind the scenes in Downing Street at the time. And today was the turn of Sir Patrick Vallance, who was the chief UK scientist during the pandemic. And if you cast your mind back to the first summer of the pandemic, when Rishi Sunak received great acclaim in some quarters, much of it in the right-wing press, for encouraging people to resume their normal lives by going out and they get a discount, I think it was £10, to go and get their dinner at Wagamama or Pizza Express. And it was very popular. Everyone went out and had dinner with Rishi, as it was described at the time. Well, there was a strand of opinion at the time that this wouldn't necessarily be the best of ideas because you were bringing together people at a point when the virus was starting to increase again. And indeed, Patrick Vallance today has suggested that this was what was behind the start of the second wave of COVID that autumn. But there was also some quite explosive claims. As we've got used to at the inquiry, there's been a series of documents and WhatsApps and diaries published, notably Sir Patrick Vallance's diary. And there's one bit in it which basically was credited to Dominic Cummings, but suggested that Sunak had reportedly said, just let people die, when scientists complained, or rather raised concerns, about the prospect of Eat Out to Help Out potentially spreading the virus further.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because obviously Rishi Sunak, in charge of the Treasury, knew that any money clawed back would be a business saved and, you know, a taxpayer's money not going out, effectively. So, you know, does it make any sense that that was what he was charged with and that's what he did in Eat Out?
Yeah, this allegation has been made many times before and has actually offended it very forthrightly, and I imagine we'll hear him make a very big defence, probably come armed. In a few weeks' time, before Christmas, he will be giving evidence himself. He will come armed with data that he says, and the Treasury put together many times before, because I remember we've written this story a few times now. I thought it was a remarkable day, actually, with Patrick Vallance. This man who's, I mean, I've met Patrick Vallance, he's a smart guy. He is an operator, he knows what he's doing. He has had a long career in the pharmaceutical world. The idea that he's somehow confused that this diary he was keeping was miraculously being forced to share it with the inquiry. Like, he knew exactly what was going to happen with that diary. So I think we take quite a lot of it with a pinch of salt. I think the searing allegation that Rishi Sunak, and I can't actually imagine Rishi Sunak actually saying, just let them die at all. It's not the kind of politician he is. I can imagine Boris Johnson making some pretty outlandish claims about bodies flying high, and indeed we've heard that from his own members of his own team, that he did say it in a sort of fit of anger about lockdown. But a third-hand source this is, so it's Patrick Vallance's diaries that Dominic Cummings told him that it's just getting into, there are big questions to be asked about this country, its preparations, whether it's ready for the next pandemic, which will come. And the inquiry seems to be really enjoying the tittle-tattle and the politics, rather than actually thinking, well, was Rishi Sunak right to be trying to get business open? Was it really to be blamed for the second wave? We don't know. But it seems to be far more focused on the tittle-tattle than the actual substance.
Yeah, the Mirror as well. Sunak let people die. Sir Patrick Vallance also talking about the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock as well.
Everyone blames him. The one thing that everyone's decided is it was all Matt Hancock.
But he kind of did suggest it could be his overzealous exuberance that led to him stating things which he patently knew the science did not match. So, but there has been a criticism that this is too character-driven, isn't it? That it should be really looking at lessons learned and not the politics of these people, the libertarianism as he described it, and their actual characters and the words they spoke.
Well, I think the issue is at the time there was a lot of drama inside Number 10. There was these big egos. We heard it from Helen McNamara a few weeks ago. All these guys sort of jostling for position and trying to be, almost like the saviour complex, wanting to be the ones that rode in with all the solutions to the problems. And the problem with that was then that, there's a litany of messages, diary entries, all the rest of it, which are very character-driven. But it's absolutely a valid point that ultimately, what do we want from the COVID inquiry? I mean, I think it's fair to say that the families of the COVID bereaved want to feel that they've had their moment in court and that people have been held to account. But also, going forward, what is the most important thing, presumably, is to make sure that we're, A, better prepared, should another pandemic ever hit again, and B, that we manage to prevent the sort of scale of deaths that occurred. So it's about the future. It's about having plans in place and learning the lessons from the past to make sure that it never happens in the same way again. And ultimately, I think probably some of this distracts from that. And you've got to hope that the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, when she's writing up the inquiry, will, of course, be focusing on the systemic problems that were there, as well as, obviously, some of the personality-driven stuff. Yeah.
Well, it is reflective to look back at that. So let's look ahead now. And plenty of coverage. In fact, I think most of the newspapers leading on what is to come in the autumn statement after Rishi Sunak gave his big set-piece speech, which I know none of you went to because it was underplayed by Downing Street, about tax cutting. Is that right? So what did he say today, and what does it mean we can presume will come on Wednesday?
I think it's a sign of quite what political trouble Rishi Sunak is in. He spent the entire year saying there's not going to be any tax cuts. We can't do that until we've tackled inflation. He's got inflation to 4%, 4.7%. He hasn't really done that. Inflation has got itself to 4.7%. And now he's saying, that's enough, right, chucks away. So, I mean, if they weren't 19 points in the polls, in some of the polling, I don't think they'd be doing this. They'd be waiting until the March. But it looks like tonight we're calling it that it's going to be a national insurance cut, not a cut to income tax, from Jeremy Hunt on Wednesday. All the signs were there from Rishi Sunak. He was talking about rewarding hard work. Obviously, national insurance is a tax on your wages. An income tax cut, I think, would be slightly ridiculous, because one of the only reasons they're actually able to afford this cut in national insurance is because the income tax take is so high because Rishi Sunak froze the rates instead of letting them go up with inflation. So they've got a record tax haul.
You've got wages going up because of inflation, but you're meeting a hard threshold,
exactly.
aren't you? That's the point.
And you're bringing in record tax takes, which they're now pinching out of your pocket with one hand and expecting the grateful public to be pleased with getting a small amount of it back. I think that's going to be a hard line.
But thresholds stop people taking on extra work. Isn't that the argument? So that would be, a boost for growth if people worked harder because they don't hit a tax threshold.
But it's also charging more people, dragging millions of more people into a higher rate than they don't deserve to be in and shouldn't have been. And traditionally, when these taxes were designed, they would never have been in.
So the Daily Telegraph, in its second paragraph, says the Prime Minister has been considering plans to cut national insurance, which you've mentioned, raise the 40% income tax threshold and reduce inheritance tax between now and the general election. Well, inheritance tax seems to have been thrown out as a policy, didn't it, over the weekend after criticism?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things here. And and it's about timing, it's about staggering it. And I think what we're expecting to see on Wednesday is what they will presumably describe as a budget for growth. So we'll have some of the inheritance tax stuff potentially, the national insurance stuff potentially, and we'll also have some stuff that business is asking for. So the primary ask is that they are allowed to
claim back more of their investment,
and the idea being that it's all about growth. So that'll be what we'll get this week, and then. And based on previous experience with Rishi Sunak, I mean, in the 2022 budget, his last budget as Chancellor, he suggested that the government would want to cut the basic rate of interest rate from 20 pence to 19 pence by 2024, should the economic conditions allow. And then last summer, when he was contesting the Conservative leadership contest, he said that over the next Parliament, he wanted to reduce that headline rate from 20p to 16p. So we've already seen that he's quite comfortable making sort of promises for what might happen in the future.
Jam tomorrow.
So you expect that there'll be a bit of jam tomorrow as well, because they'll want to save up their big tax-cutting offer for the budget in spring, just before a general election.
So if this is about shoring up the core vote now, which is what it seems to be for the Conservative Party, what help is there for, wealthier middle-class Tory voters, if I can put it
Well, I think there'll be the dangle of the inheritance tax cut. I think there'll be a dangle of a stamp duty threshold raised, but all of those, stamp duty they think is inflationary now, so they don't want to risk, the worst case thing they'd do is if they have a budget and then in January inflation starts ticking up again and they get directly blamed for that again. But I think there has been a bit of a scramble in the last sort of week. Everything that the Prime Minister has been throwing at the wall hasn't quite worked. His reshuffle, sort of, I think, as Sam Coates said, summed it up quite nicely earlier, was that it opens more questions than it solves. You've had his big net zero reset, the HS2 thing went off half-cocked at conference. It turns out a ban on smoking isn't bringing people flocking to the Tory cause. So it really does feel like sort of last chance saloon territory.
Well, here's your take on it.
Indeed,
national insurance trim will put cash in people's pockets.
Finally.
Do we know what the trim will look like?
We don't. I don't know. I've been trying. As Pippa has today, I've been hammering anyone that might have seen it. But it's like all of these things. It's gone into now a very lockdown thing. A lockdown. It was interesting.
Lockdown with a lot of teasing.
Lockdown.
The danger is,
they're sort of let
and we might all be
run.
disappointed.
Well, someone's going to be disappointed if you let so much stuff trail. Yeah.
Politically within the party, with the Conservative backbenchers as well, because of course you had the red wall backbenchers over the weekend suggesting that actually inheritance tax and the prospect of that being dangled would be terrible, and it would, because lots of this is going to be funded. I mean, yes, there's the sort of the extra fiscal headroom, which the sort of rather arbitrary rule, which creates more money available for them to be able to spend, but also benefits are going to be squeezed. And, potentially there could be 2 billion plus coming from benefits being squeezed. So from the one hand, you're squeezing benefits on working people, and to gain money, to give it to the middle classes, the wealthiest, with inheritance tax, which only affects 4% of people, don't forget. It's a very...
4% of people a year, you only die once.
Even though it's... Well, even if it's the very...
It's not like you pay 4% pay all the time.
But even if it's the very... it's one of the most unpopular taxes, it affects a very small number of people. The states just aren't big enough to be affected by it. But that would be very difficult to sell politically. And then there are other parts of the Conservative Party that are putting pressure on Rishi Sunak to alter other aspects of tax, whether it's business or whether it's stamp duty in some cases. So he's facing a lot of pressure politically. And one of the problems, I think, with dangling all these different options over the last few days is that somebody's going to end up disappointed. In the first instance, certain groups of Conservative MPs who might then kick off about it, but much more importantly, members of the public, voters.
We'll just quickly say we've got a story tomorrow that he is going to give extra £12 million cash to domestic violence shelters, which is something we've been campaigning on for the better part of 20 years.
There you go, and it's in your story there. Yes, well done. I'm reading your Save Our Shelters and Give Me Shelter campaign.
Indeed.
Well done to you lot. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll continue our coverage of The Sun as well with the exclusive they've got with Volodymyr Zelensky and his reporting about how many times Russia has tried to kill him. Back in that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar from The Sun and The Guardian. Let's go to your paper then, shall we? The Sun. Putin has tried to kill me 5 times, or 5 or 6 times, it says. And the quote is, well, it's a great quote, isn't it? You take it away.
Well, he said it's just a little bit like COVID. The first time's pretty awful, but you get used to it by the 5th time, which remarkable stoicism from a man who's literally trying to have his being bombed into smithereens, if he could. So, yes, my colleague Jerome Starkey, our defence editor's he's on his way back now, rapidly filing from a train, I understand. But had a sit down with Zelensky today. He's obviously it's been a tough month or two, and obviously you can't compare chalk and cheese and 2 different horrific conflicts. But it is fair to say that the war in Ukraine has slipped down the news agenda in the last well, since October the 7th. It really has. And so I think there's a growing fear that the political situation in America is shifting. The Republican leadership candidates, if you look at all of them, are saying some pretty scary things about pulling support for Zelensky, pulling support for the war. You've got Joe Biden in an increasingly feeble state, who has been leading the charge in terms of fundraising and support for Ukraine. Not guaranteed he's going to be around for the campaign. So I think it's a remarked escalation in what Zelensky is brilliant at doing, which is showing the world exactly the plight he's in. And we've got pages and pages and pages of this tomorrow, and I recommend you have a read. It's moving stuff.
And, no doubt the Israel-Hamas conflict is diversionary. We know that Iran and Russia have been in cahoots over the Ukrainian war. So
he touches on that.
It benefits, it benefits Russia, doesn't it, actually, the diversion of what's happening in the Middle East now? Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm just always very struck by, I remember the very first time that it came to light that Zelensky had a challenge on his life. I think it was Wagner Group, wasn't it? They went into Kyiv and tried to assassinate him. And just thinking actually how fragile the situation is, because so much of it, at that point particularly, was based on the fact that he was a strong leader and he was kind of felt like he was holding the country together. He was making these daily addresses. And actually, you could tip the balance where one of these attempts to be successful. So, it does feel very fragile. And obviously, he will be desperate to make sure that what's going on in Ukraine isn't forgotten. Everything Harry says about the state supplies. Our new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, was, of course, in Kyiv early this week. I've lost track of when he was actually there.
First visit, it was Saturday morning, I think it was.
It was over the weekend, in fact,
Friday.
So
the last couple of weeks have just blurred into...
Just to reassure them that with this sort of change at the Foreign Office, that Britain is still, and despite the focus on the Middle East, that Britain is still committed to what happens to Ukraine. But increasingly, I think, we'll have to look to Europe, and I include the UK in Europe, to try and sort of work out how the West is going to respond to what's happening in Ukraine going forward, because of Russia, because America obviously has got other priorities.
I do want to get to Nigel Farage, if you don't mind, because you've both got such acute political brains. You might be sitting here eating goodness knows what, but the point is, if he does well here, will it make a difference to the general election next year as well? Anyway, talk about that. If you want.
Well, is the repulsive dishes, including quattro formaggio of sheep, bull, pig and crocodile penis that the Brexit politician had to swallow, with some lovely pictures there of his face as he...
We can guess what that is,
had one of these really delicious... What was it? It was the Jungle Pizzeria.
Yeah, he did quite well yesterday. I actually watched it last night, I think, because I've got a hunch that he's actually going to do quite well in this show. And the whole reason he's doing it is because, yes, he appeals to a certain older section of society, but he's also weirdly huge on TikTok. And I think he's trying to sort of, he wants to keep that brand Nigel alive for a whole different generation.
And who would he campaign for, though?
Well, Nigel Farage. It doesn't matter. He will get on whichever vehicle will help Nigel Farage keep rumbling on. He's, he did UKIP, then the Brexit Party, then, he's involved in reform. They're sort of polling at 10% in some opinion polls. I think it's probably a little inflated. They got 8% in one of the by-elections. I can't remember which one it was, not long ago.
But the point is, they take seats for the Conservatives, which can have a material difference.
Exactly, he pulled out in 2019 to give Boris a clear run. He withdrew the Brexit Party, and lots of people around him think that was a big mistake. now. So are we going to see one more heave? I think we're certainly going to see him heaving a bit
He's a very divisive politician. He obviously wants to try and win over the part of the population that is very anti him for all sorts of reasons.
OK.
So we'll see whether he manages it.